You're going to color in the top on this. So again, right at this point, you want to work on this clay, the clay you'll be coloring. And then you don't pull through it. Look at the shape right now. This is essentially your 3 Mile Island cooling tower. It's the clay that is reserved for collaring that mostly changes the shape from a strict 3 Mile Island cooling tower. Now that's the first expanding pole. This is very much like the bowl demo in that you're going to do a series of passes, all of which do the same thing. And that thing that they're doing is not too hard to describe. At every point you have a widest point of the pot. Right now that's right here. And every pole is going to start ideally by pushing in slightly at the bottom, because that helps start the wave, and then that you're going to follow with the pull. Oh, I made a little mistake there. And you're going to build a new wall to a new widest point on the form, which with respect to the old widest point is going to be a little bit wider and a little bit lower. Above that widest point, you're basically constructing a dome. Now it's important that you want to be, with each of these pulls, thinning the wall, squeezing it, to make it thinner. If you're just pushing it out without squeezing it and essentially building a new wall, you're weakening it. If you are squeezing it enough to rearrange the clay, and decide exactly where I want to transition into the neck here. If you're actually squeezing it enough to thin it and build a new wall, you're making it stronger. However, in doing this, gradually you get to the point where the clay is too thin to pull in a normal fashion. And by a pull, I mean pressure applied. There's a little issue down in here. Pressure applied between 2 points to squeeze the wall together and make it thinner. That's what I'm talking about as a pull. And right now the clay is already too thin to pull in that way, probably from about up here up to here. Expand this dome up here a little bit. Trying to make this look right where it should be at this point. Anyway, when the wall gets too thin to pull, that's when you can stretch it. Now I'm going to continue pulling. Clay's getting pretty thin down here already. Way too thin to pull here. I'm just stretching it out to the rib here. Stretch this out a little bit. From the base to the new widest point, you're building a slightly concave wall. The concave shape is critical to make the pot able to withstand the growing stress that you're subjecting it to. Down here, now expanding this, I just within the last few years have started expanding a pot like this by using a rib on the inside. And that takes a little practice. You don't have to do it this way. You can do it with your finger. Learn to use a rib on the inside. Like I say, takes practice. But I would recommend to anybody who seriously wants to learn to throw, to be a good thrower, that it's worth the investment in time to learn to do it. Because once you've gotten used to it, you just know it's the best way to do it. This again, when you do it, you'll feel it's the same thing that's happening to the clay when you're laying down the wall of a bowl. And it's such a cool feeling. I can't get down to the base with the rib, so I'll expand that out. And from here I'll finish with my fingers. Maybe when I've been using a rib on the inside longer, I'll feel comfortable doing the final finishing with the rib inside. I feel like I can be more sensitive with my fingers. The real stress when you start collaring is at the beginning. Once you get this clay to start coming in, and I'll warn you, when you're collaring on top of a form that's swollen out like this, you really have to be much more delicate, because the clay is much more subject to wanting to start to deform from the stress you're putting on it, deform in the lower section of the pot. And as I said, you don't want the clay underneath what you're working on to change shape at all. It may change a little bit, but you basically want to be able to treat it like you're working on the wheel head at right about here. As I was saying, the real stress on the base is most severe when you're getting the collaring started. I can't get the sweat right where I want it. When you've expanded a form the way I have here, it's not uncommon for the clay to be a little thick right here, and you want to work that in. And if you've got water running down the side, you want to strip that off. Now, as I say, I think I said this in the previous collaring demo, when you get to where you're working on a narrower diameter, the stress that you're applying to the clay in collaring and pulling it is much less on the lower part of the pot. Simply, like I said, I believe I said this before, it's a leverage thing. You can push just as hard on something that's this small, and because of the difference in diameter, the same amount of stress applied to the clay is considerably less than when the pot was, what you were working on was this wide. It's also an additional phenomenon that a lot of times with collaring, getting it started moving is the hardest part. That's when the clay really wants to resist, and once it understands that coming in like this is what it really wants to do, you won't fight back as much. Okay, here's the finished pot. You, I'm sure, are aware of the fact that my camera ran out of memory space before I finished it. But all I was doing at that point was finishing the neck, and you've seen that in the collaring demo. There's nothing of importance there. I said I wanted to dry this some before cutting it in half. I don't know how it's going to cut. We'll find out. And I was kind of thinking this might be the case. Anyway, the reason I want you to see the wall thickness is that when you're throwing a form like this, you actually can make a much thinner wall than if you're throwing a cylinder. And you can see here, clean off some of this burr, that the wall thickness that we have here is thinner than with a cylinder.